It's almost 1984. In the late 1940s, this was George Orwell's vision of it. A future world of sinister technology used by a powerful few to subjugate the many. Unlike everybody else, I am not going to look for traces of this vision in the real 1984. I'll happily leave that to others. By contrast, what I'm going to do is to travel back in time, to the year the novel was written, to 1948, to see what the future really brought for the man in the street.
Here I am, perhaps a not very typical man in the street with a funny accent, and now 55 years old. My adult life has neatly spanned the period between 1948, when Orwell was writing his famous novel, and now, when it virtually is 1984. Many people will think that since then, we've all been caught in a headlong rush of new technology, which has changed the lives of all of us in the most profound manner.
But was 1948 really that different? Would the past now seem to us like a strange foreign country? That's what I'm going back to find out.
Here comes my bus. This bus, 35 years late, is going to be my time machine, which will transport me into the past.
Plenty wrong, Top Cap.
Well, here we are, as you see, in the late 1940s. And outside the window, it actually is 1948.
That's the Woody Woodpecker song. Violets, lovely violets.
Princess Elizabeth has had her first child. I wonder what they'll call him. Mr. Attlee is Prime Minister, Stafford Cripps is Chancellor of the Exchequer. From the way I'm dressed, I'm clearly identified as a member of the working class, somebody who Orwell, rather more crudely, would have called one of the proles. What will strike us as unusual is that class is so easily identifiable from the clothes we wear. My cloth cap makes me a member of the working class, whereas the way that man's dressed clearly labels him as middle class.
Any more place, please?
A fourpenny one, please.
Thanks, Scott.
What else? Although there are plenty of buses, we can't see many cars. Perhaps not entirely surprising, because not many people own them anyway, and petrol's been rationed until a few months ago. People seem to be walking about everywhere, and it still seems quite natural to be using one's legs. And when they aren't walking, they are queuing. Not queuing only for buses, but queuing for everything. Food, clothing, petrol, cigarettes. But not queuing for jobs. Because here in 1948, we still have full employment. Everything is very uniform. Look at that street market.
They're lovely.
Everybody's dressed much the same, in dark, drab colors. There's little attempt at sartorial self-expression. Compare this with a modern street. Here, everything is much more glamorous and cosmopolitan. The idea of a personal style and mobility is very strongly expressed.
back here in 1948, that's another difference, which emphasizes how strange it all is. Here we see people going away on their holidays. It's a traditional journey by train to the hop fields of Kent by East Enders, who are following in the footsteps of their parents, and very likely their grandparents too. In terms of personal mobility, this annual journey by train to the hop fields in Kent or to seaside resorts such as Scarborough or Blackpool represent the limits of working class expectations. Actually, in 1948, only 2 million private cars are registered, and these belong predominantly to the middle and upper classes.
A holiday abroad is still something that belongs to the future.
Meanwhile, back in 1948, in my working class clothes, this is a kind of house which I might have lived in. Let's go inside. I think we might find some striking differences. First, this tin bath. It might have been used rather cozily in front of the fire. Come in. The fire is an open coal fire, of course, which except on very special occasions would have provided the only form of heating in the house. I very much hope that my tea is keeping hot in the oven. A coal fire such as this is, of course, pretty inefficient. Not only does a lot of the heat go up the chimney, but merely providing the draft draws a lot of cold air into the room all the time. Before the war, we invested in this rather elaborate kitchen cabinet. Designed for better days, its shelves are now filled with the results of much curing. And of course, many of the items are rationed. The makers have thoughtfully provided a list of 3 weeks' menus. However, the effect in these austere post-war days is merely to make the saliva gather in my mouth and to stimulate my imagination. They've also provided a list of the calorie content of some typical foods. Now, in 1948, we are getting pretty close to being short of calories. We are also short of fuel, so keeping warm is really quite a problem. Certainly, the most effective way of burning fuel, that's food in this case, is to burn it up inside myself to provide a sort of central heating, then to keep the heat in by wearing lots of clothes. That's why I'm muffled up like this. To some small extent, fuel, food, and clothing are interchangeable. There is, of course, no telephone or television. Electricity is only recently crept into homes such as these, and even then only as a 5-amp supply, and therefore insufficient to run major appliances such as washing machines or electric fires, even if I could afford them. It is, however, good enough to run a radio and to run a light or two in every room. Instead of an electric washing machine, we have this. Inside, the washing is churned around by this man-powered paddle, or I suppose in 1948, much more likely to be woman-powered paddle. Instead of a vacuum cleaner, we have this carpet sweeper, again muscle-powered. And instead of the refrigerator, we have this meat safe, which at least keeps out the flies.
Perhaps we see here most strongly the total contrast with domestic life in the 1980s. Thanks to power electricity, the modern home is now a very mechanized environment. But perhaps the most striking contrast of all is at work. In these days before health and safety or the Clean Air Act, work is pretty exhausting.
Here you see me plodding home after a hard day's work, during which I would have been exposed to noxious vapors, toxic substances, and a hazardous environment. And most important of all, to hard physical work, which leaves me little energy to spare to enjoy leisure activities. All this is very different now, as you can see. Mechanization has removed the need for hard physical labor from much of industry, and from domestic chores too, for that matter. And this means there are now many people with literally calories to burn. So, as you saw, our journey into the past, perhaps not unexpectedly, has shown us a world which is very different from our own. I'm now going to repeat the journey into 1948, but this time with a very significant difference. I'm going to be a well-to-do businessman. So here we are in the same 1948. At this time, I'm a successful businessman. Maybe the director and owner of a small company. My clothes are significant. In 1948, I still dress up more warmly, whoever I am, than I would in the 1980s. Even my hat helps to prevent heat loss from my balding pate. Clearly, I have a motor car, which gives me greatly increased personal mobility. And in my car, I have a radio, which allows me music while I drive.
My work in a comfortable office leaves me with enough energy for a variety of leisure experiences.
And now, welcome to my bright and prosperous home. Just like the working class home, I've got electricity for lighting, and I can run my radio off electricity, but in addition, I've also got power electricity, which allows me to run a number of domestic appliances, such as this Hoover, for instance, which allows me to keep the home clean more easily. And in addition, for the cold days, I've got an electric fire. Being a prosperous, self-made, and maybe even slightly vulgar man, I've got one of these newfangled television sets. Let's see what's on. It may take a little time to come up. Here it is.
That's why we want this pastry fairly firm. There's a story in Cornwall that a pasty should be, a perfect pasty, should be so tough that it should be possible to drop it down a tin mine without it breaking. Well, that's a counsel of perfection.
Whilst Philip Harben's exploring the theory, my wife is actually translating to practice in a fully fitted electrified kitchen. There she has an electric refrigerator, a toaster, a mixer, and a washing machine, which is heated by gas, but is fitted with an electric wringer. And upstairs, next to our beds, we have a teas maid. And being 1948, we still have one of the most versatile of domestic appliances. That's a maid. What better after a grueling week at the office than a trip in the Rover? This year I've been lucky, because it's the first year since the war that tourism has been permitted. And this is the reason why today my destination is Northolt. Good morning. I'm booked on the Paris flight. Here you see my prosperous self off on a well-earned weekend abroad. Thank you.
At the airport, there are some strange rituals.
Good morning, sir. And how much currency are you carrying with you?
£5 in sterling and £30 in tablet checks.
Any jewellery at all? Or any other valuables?
No, none whatsoever.
May I see your wallet, please?
The currency regulations are so strict that I might even be searched to see if I'm taking more than £35.
Fine. Thank you very much, sir.
However, some of the formalities are strangely familiar.
And most familiar of all, the endless waiting around.
British European Airways flight to Paris. Will passengers please proceed to the departure exit?
Inside the aircraft itself, there are just a few strange features. Barley sugar has been provided to clear my ears, and cotton wool balls to protect me against the noise. And in case the heating should fail, the management has kindly provided me with a blanket. However, as I sit here in 1948, waiting for takeoff, it must have occurred to you that all the technology which contributes to the material comfort of my life is familiar to you. The radios, television sets, aeroplanes and food mixers may be more bulbous, but in terms of the impact which they have on my life in 1948, I could just as easily be in 1984.
However, here, I'm one of the privileged few. Now, I'm one of the many. The have-nots have all become the haves. What the future has brought is not a radical change in the technology, but essentially similar technology spread out to everyone. It's also brought us better food.
Behold the gastronomic delights of 1948. (1948), as you can see, was a year in which the shortages brought about by the war were still painfully obvious. Actually, in 1947 and 1948, the diet was at its dreariest, even including the war years. Almost everything was rationed, even bread. It wasn't that anybody actually went hungry or was short of any of the vital vitamins, but the sheer lack of variety and the lack of any of the nice things to eat made it a great trial. Fortunately, 1948 was a good year for fish and tomatoes. So I suppose it ought to be smoked haddock and tomatoes which I ought to have in this progressive working class caterer.
Haddock.
Thank you. Thank you. The rigors of rationing bore down alike on rich and poor. Whilst I'm eating my fish here, the patrons at the Savoy might have been enjoying an almost identical meal, perhaps garnished with a few truffles and asparagus.
And while the knobs at Punier's tuck into seafood with white wine, people like me are eating the same thing at Southend with vinegar.
The government made valiant attempts to enrich the diet and imported stocks of an unheard of fish called the snook. It didn't actually catch on with the ration eaters. It very rapidly became a music hall joke and ultimately was quietly sold off as cat food.
Smoke, smoke, smoke that cigarette. Puff, 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 and though you smoke yourself to death, you can't...
Health is another area in which almost everybody is better off in 1984. In this 1948 cafe, for instance, smoking is only limited by the scarcity of cigarettes, not by any worries about its possible health effects. In fact, the Chancellor of the Exchequer of the day advised smokers to smoke your cigarettes right down to the butt. It may even be good for you.
I just got to have another cigarette.
What else? TB, still a scourge in 1948, will have been conquered by 1984. But most important of all, 1948 saw the establishment of the health service, which, with supporting legislation, laid the foundation of the caring society. Changes in health, housing, and diet have undoubtedly been accelerated by the recovery process following the war. On the other hand, the possession of the technical goodies illustrated in this autumn issue of a rather upmarket magazine have been more slow to follow. But even this process is well nigh complete by 1984.
So why has it happened? Why this great spread of the goodies to everyone? One reason is that relative to our incomes, everything has got cheaper. If we were to translate the prices from pounds into working days' wages, we'd see a striking change. Today, a fridge represents 5 days' average wages. In 1948, we would have needed 80 days. A television set now costs 18 times the daily wage. In 1948, it was 133 times. And a car, which now takes 350 days to earn, would have taken nearly 1,200. And now that we've all got access to credit, we can have now and pay later.
Mañana, mañana, mañana is soon enough for me.
For working class me in 1948, the world of a bank account, a personal loan, and credit cards is still a long way off. I have difficulty in saving up enough money for major purchases. And this is why most of the furniture in my house is second-hand. The only forms of credit I enjoy are with a corner shop for groceries and with a tallyman who sells household linen and clothes against a weekly payment which he comes and collects. Hire purchase is becoming fashionable, and for the likes of me, even respectable.
So I'm already thinking of buying, on the never never, some of those things I've always rather wanted. For my wealthier counterparts, of course, overcoming money worries is child's play.
My prosperous self is here doing the firm's account, aided by a bit of pretty primitive mechanization. Now, if I want credit, because I've got a bank account, I can go to my bank manager, and no doubt something can be arranged. Back at the bank, the kind of mechanization which they're using is really rather similar to this, except perhaps that it may be electrically driven. And it's, of course, very slow. Now imagine the transactions of millions of credit-hungry people being processed by equipment such as this. It simply couldn't be done because it's simply too slow. Fortunately, in 1948, clever people at the Bell Laboratories in the United States have invented the transistor. And transistor, of course, is the basis of all computing as we know today. Now you, in the 1980s, will know where that led to.
Oh, that'll do nice.
So, now that we all enjoy computerized, credit-assisted access to all this gleaming technology, have the differences between the few and the many disappeared? Has the spread of all this glossy machinery made everything not only more convenient, but more democratic than in 1948? Isn't this a dream fulfilled?
Here, in the simple days of 1948, I am mending a puncture. Actually, I can do most of the household repairs. Not just the bicycle, but also the carpet sweeper, and maybe even the radio. I have the necessary mechanical skills, and the technology involved isn't all that hard to understand. Much the same is true at work, where much the same level of skill and understanding are required. In other words, therefore, I can understand how things around me work. I just can't afford to buy them. The distinction in the 1940s is between the few who can afford to buy the goods and the many who can't. As our two journeys have shown, by the 1980s, all this will have changed. And almost everybody will be able to afford to buy the goods. And in that sense, therefore, the distinction between the few and the many will have disappeared. However, another gap yawns, a new division between the few and the many. At work, manual skills have become less important because of mechanization and automation. The processes themselves have become so complex that I can no longer understand them. It is as if in 1948 a pocket calculator had magically appeared in my hand. I could quickly learn how to use it, but I wouldn't understand how it worked. And exactly the same would be true in 1984. The real division, therefore, is between the few clever people who understand and manage the technology and the many who merely use it.
And in this sense, of understanding the technology enough to make decisions about it, the future is as far away for the many now as it was in 1948. Some futures, alas, take longer to come than others. Certainly, as I look down from my bus into a busy modern shopping street, I see a society which is, materially at least, very much better off than we would ever have dreamt possible in 1948.
But there's one disturbing thing which raises echoes of the 1940s. And that is the thought of people still standing in line.
The difference is that in 1948, the queues were for goods, not for jobs. In fact, almost everyone was employed. Now it's the other way around. Now the goods are plentiful, but it's the jobs which are scarce. It's like a mirror image of 1948.
What has happened, of course, is the mechanization of labor-intensive jobs, not just in industry, but indeed in the home as well.
Machines are really rather good at dull and repetitive tasks. They free us from the shackles of hard and boring work. What most people perhaps don't realize is that machines may actually be better than people at producing wealth. An automated factory is really rather like a gushing oil well. The problem for our future is the relationship of machines to people. How can we share out the wealth the machines produce? And equally important, what will we do with all those people the machines replace?
Here I can only give you my personal vision. Unlike Orwell's 1984, I take a rather more optimistic view. I think they can, and indeed should do, all those jobs which machines never can do. Jobs which will always be labor-intensive, such as teaching, nursing, and caring in general. Jobs where our qualities as human beings are the important ones. In 1948, legislation laid the foundation for a caring society. In 1984, we have the technology to bring it about. It will take time, commitment, and some agony. It is a future which you want, and it's a future which I want. However, this future, too, may be rather further away than both of us would like to think.
I'm so tired of waiting for you, so tired of longing for you, tired of waiting, saving my love for you. I'm so tired of waiting for you, so tired of longing for you, tired of waiting, saving my love for you. So tired of dreaming of you, so tired of waiting for you, but though I'm tired,